Welcome to Gaslit, the power of story. I'm Tommy Hausman. Today, I'm joined by community advocate Chris Norick, whose deep dive into Indiana's utility rules, rate trackers, and regulatory filings has helped thousands understand why bills look the way they do. In this episode, we walk through the past 2 weeks of headlines: a $5 million community fund, a $3 monthly credit, promises of town halls, and the sale of an Ohio gas business, and what any of that actually means for families here locally. We keep it factual. We talk about base rates, why disconnection notices are soaring, what the IURC controls, and which actions, weatherization, real consumer protections, and fair on-bill relief can move the needle. This is about a little bit of clarity, a little bit of understanding, and a whole lot of education. So let's get into it. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you joining me here today. This is episode 5 of Gaslit, the Power of Story. And for our listeners who might not know yet, can you tell them a little bit about your background, what you do, and how you became so knowledgeable about utility companies in Indiana?
Thanks for having me, Tommy. This is so important, the work that you're doing. I'm really happy that this has really taken off and the community gets a chance to tell their stories because they really have to be told. I was born up in Gibson County, part of a coal mining family. So, I know that world fairly well, but I've been in Evansville for, it's kind of ridiculous to say, 30 years at this point. I went to school out at USI. I was a student worker at USI, and then I was employed at USI for 25 years. And so a couple of years ago, and we can kind of get into that a little bit, I left the university to kind of help the community more directly. So I definitely believe in the mission of public education, especially public higher education, but I felt a little disconnected and I wanted to have more of a direct connection. And so I ended up going to work for a national nonprofit called Solar United Neighbors. And that nonprofit, they're not solar installers, they're solar advocates, but they do help folks go solar, join together and fight for their energy rights. And so that drew me in because I've had an interest in solar. I like tech. I had experienced Sigico, Vectron, and then CenterPoint, and was pretty fed up with them and their high rates and their really reluctance to look to the future to see a path to clean energy in Indiana. Like I said, I grew up in a coal family. It paid the bills when I was young, but I knew that there was a better way. Even driving out to USI every day, you could see the smokestacks at A.B. Brown right over in Posey County. You could see that smoke every day. And, like I said, I did that for 25 years. I've been aware of the other coal plant over in Warrick County because my dad worked out at Alcoa. And so that was the other coal plant that we're next to. I've got family that works out the Gibson plant. One of my grandmother's lady boyfriends worked out at Gibson, and I actually took a tour of it a long, long time ago and got to see it up close. I've been out to the Petersburg plant, and all of that had an effect on me growing up. But I think the biggest thing that made me realize that this wasn't the best way to generate power was Old Bend Coal Company out of Pike County bought, and I think they sold. No, I think they gave. So Old Bend Coal Company gave some land to the local Boy Scout office to make their newest Boy Scout camp. And so I was the first crew on the first summer to go out there. And I was in the environmental science class, and one of our projects was to take large limestone rocks and put them in the creek that kind of had this orange tinge to it that fed into the main lake that we swam in and boated in and fished in because it was too acidic to support any kind of real aquatic life. And this was all strip mine. So pretty much most of Pike County has been mined at some point. It is all reclaimed, sort of reclaimed strip mine. So that's a long path to say that I've been interested in solar, interested in breaking away from the utility company for a while. I knew that Indiana had passed a law to end what's called net metering, which is where any kilowatt hour that you don't use and put on the grid, it goes in like a kilowatt hour credit bank that you can draw from at night, or if the winters are kind of long. They're killing that off and switching to a system that essentially only paid you. It used to be about a third, and now it's about a quarter. So it's 4 cents anytime that you put power on the grid. And I knew that made it much more difficult for regular folks to go solar and take advantage of the power that it could provide. So it was like I had to pull the trigger, and this was in 2020.
So is that what sparked you to start tracking and really understanding what our local utility companies are doing?
In a roundabout way. So I DIY'd that solar system on my garage with the help of my family. It was a COVID project, essentially.
Yeah.
And the next February, I got my bill, and I was really excited. I'd been online, or the system had been online, and my bill was as much as it was before I put the solar on in February. And I did not understand what was going on. It didn't make any sense. That wasn't right. And so I ended up online searching around, trying to figure out what was going on. I thought surely, they didn't bill me correctly, or there's something with the agreement, because you have to sign an agreement whenever you put solar on your home with the utility company. And it turned out a whole lot of other people were talking about that too. And I discovered this group called Direct Action Against CenterPoint Energy on Facebook. So I joined it, and I seen all of these other people talking about these humongous bills they were getting that February. And so that's when I decided, okay, I got to figure out what's going on, because nobody really knew what was happening. I mean, we just knew we got these bills, didn't make any sense. And so I started really digging in. I wanted to understand how our utility bills were calculated. And so I kind of figured out that they do publish what's called a tariff every month. And it's a several 100-page document on both the gas and the electric side. And it describes exactly how they charge you. But you have to really dig into all of the details, because it's every rate class in there. So, residential is a rate class. Industrial customers are a rate class, and they have, public lighting and pool heating, and there's just a whole variety of things in that several 100-page document. So I had to tease out what actually applied to residential customers. And that was the first contribution that I thought that I made to this growing community. DACE is how we call it. He's like, hey, here's this tool. I put it in Google spreadsheets. You can put in your usage, your dates, and it'll actually spit out all these line items that are hidden from you. I mean, that was step one. Step two was figuring out what those line items actually meant. And that took a lot of extra work. And I'm so thankful for Citizens Action Coalition, who kind of took DACE under their wings in the early days and to help explain this. I mean, they have lawyers. They've been doing this since I believe 1974. Being consumer advocates in state regulatory systems, because the state regulatory system, I won't say it's complicated for a reason, but it's probably complicated for a reason, because It's extremely complicated.
Yeah. So, what was the most surprising thing that you found when you started tracking all that?
Yeah, it was the amount of hidden line items that we don't see. And this is even going before this most recent rate case, where they added a couple of extra line items to our bills, so you have a little bit of a peek into it. There are a dozen what they now call adjustments on your bill. And that's not the industry term. The industry term is typically a tracker or a rider. And these are all basically line item charges that the state legislature has passed, that they can, what they call, recover costs. And anytime you hear recover costs, that means take costs from us and give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
They say they're always owed recovery. That's the term that they use.
Yeah.
And there are a dozen of those that happen outside of what we call a formal rate case hearing, like we had last February, where 1,000 or so folks came out. There was a record 9 hours of testimony for that rate case to say, please don't increase the so-called base rates.
My wife spoke at that.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It is one of the things that does give me hope. I mean, just to hear even folks from the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor be so surprised at that turnout, because it never really happened to that degree anywhere in Indiana before.
Yeah.
You know, people were aware, and a lot of that work was from DACE, getting the word out, educating people about how all of this works. Because I mean, first we educated ourselves, and then like our mission is to educate everyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, we first started out going to our city council, their meetings every other week, waiting for the public comment period and getting up and asking for help, because we didn't know who else to go to. You know, don't they control the rates? No, they do not.
Yeah.
It turns out.
Yeah.
And so just that learning on a personal level, like, fuels me. I love learning new things.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most impressive things I've seen.
I think it's complicated for people to understand, where to direct that anger and where to direct that frustration and what there is that they can do about it. And I think that education is absolutely something that can help guide them to understand what steps they can take next. So in just a couple weeks, our local utility company has made a series of public announcements: a $5 million community fund, $3 monthly credit, new community meetings, and a sale of their Ohio gas business. From your perspective, I mean, what's happening here? I mean, that's a lot of press conferences, a lot of announcements in 2 weeks' time. What do you think prompted this wave of announcements?
It's the local outcry. I mean, before this rate case hit, there was already a sentiment that I think DACE helped to create, that, I mean, people understood that we had high bills. They did not understand that we had the highest bills in Indiana. So, like, getting that word out to folks to help them understand just exactly where we are in the scheme of things in Indiana, I think opened a lot of people's eyes. That's one of the other surprising things that I learned through, like, digging into all of these filings and reports that they have to file with the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, is they publish a yearly report that occurs on July 1st every year. They throw in 1,000 kilowatt hours into a calculator, just like the bill calculator that I developed, and it spits out a number for each of the 5 investor-owned utilities, and also some municipal utilities as well, which is a good comparison. And we've been on top since 2007, and way on top for that amount of time. I mean, when you look at the chart, I think I have one here on the table. It's absurd how much higher that we've been than everybody else.
Yeah, that's a hockey stick.
And then how much higher it went when this rate increase hit.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a surprising thing. You know, just following this, I knew it was going to be bad. I figured it was going to be in the 20% range just from what was being reported, and it was worse than that. I mean, it was 25% at a time when we had a really hot and humid summer. And that hit folks hard, because these rates went into effect in February, just in time for the hot summer. And this is on top of what happened to all of us back when I first got involved with DACE, is they got a 271% increase in gas distribution rates. That's why everybody's gas bills were so high. As soon as CenterPoint came to town and bought out Vectren, they went for rate cases on the gas side, got that enormous, almost a 3x increase in the most expensive part of our bills. So we were already suffering from that. And then we had the highest rates. And then they got 25% increase in what we were being billed year over year. So that's why folks are in the streets. We've had protests. That's why we're seeing small businesses take to social media and call them out on it. I think it's important because people are suffering, and we have data to show that. They sent out over 200,000 disconnect notices a couple of years ago, and we're probably going to be on track for that again.
Yeah, I can't see how that's even possible to where we're not. Yeah. So, do you think that this outcry, where people are talking and people are telling their story, sharing their story, and being outraged, and trying to find someone to blame, and trying to figure out what the problem is, and just sharing and getting organized, is really what is putting the pressure on our local monopoly?
I think it is. And it's because it went beyond everyday citizens. It went into the business world, which I think in public discourse has a little bit more power over these kind of things. And so to get to that level where local businesses are posting their actual bill online and saying, look, I have to have a good week just to pay my utility bill. And if I don't have a good week, we're going to be in trouble. That says something. That's not normal. I mean, it's not been normal for residential customers for a long time. To finally see it kind of crack through and having small businesses speak out publicly, I think that made a significant difference.
Yeah. Yeah, our academy, having them bring in all that's, I mean, that story really says something, and having those all hung up in the bar, that's poignant.
Yes.
All right, so let's start with the big headline: $5 million community and energy improvement fund. Is that going to make a difference? Is that going to help? Is that are they actually doing something?
Yeah, let's go through some of these. I think we'll try to tackle them one at a time, from their press release on October 23rd. So to start off with, they said that they were going to have a 2-year rate stability, and I think it's important to note that the first line after that headline was starting the first quarter of 2026. So that's important because this rate increase was actually broken into 2 parts. It was a phase 1 and phase 2. We've been through phase 1. Phase 2 will occur in spring of 2026. So they are saying there will be rate stability after that second phase in occurs. We don't know how much that phase in is going to be. There's been a lot of confusion about what the numbers are. I don't think it's 50-50. I don't think it's going to be as much as we saw this summer, but I don't know. But there's definitely going to be another significant rate increase next spring as the second phase occurs. So I think that's important. They also talked about not going for any additional rate cases between here and 2028. And that's good. But remember, they didn't go for a rate case since I think it was like 2009. It had been a long time because they had the highest return on equity of all the Indiana utilities. They were making significant money. That's why we had the highest bills than all the entire state. And so they have those dozen trackers that we just talked about that you don't see on your bill that do go up every quarter, some of them every 6 months, some of them every year. So they are on this ever increasing cycle of higher and higher bills, even though they're not going for a formal rate case. So that's kind of like their bullet point number 1. The second one is they talked about offsetting the October rate increase. This one got the most headlines in social media and the newspaper. This was the quote unquote $3 that they mentioned as some kind of relief. That, I mean, I think my quote in the newspaper was it was a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair to say. I don't think that's out of line, because to say $3 is any kind of relief when we've had a 25% increase in our bills is a little bit absurd. So unfortunately, it's not real relief, because if you looked at the press release, it talked about it was going to offset the October increase. And they didn't mention what that October increase was. And so, because I know how to find these things now, I looked into it. And so I pulled it up. I ran it through my calculator, and there's approximately a $6.50 increase that occurred on 1,000 kilowatt hours. That's kind of like the standard unit of measurement. You may use more than that, you may use less than that, but at 1,000 kilowatt hours, it's a $6.50 increase. So that $3 is actually because the second turbine went online over at AEB Brown. So, a good chunk of why our rates went up was this new, sometimes they're called peaker plant. It was a gas plant that replaced a coal plant in Posey County. So there was a lot of delays in construction. It's really difficult to get those gas turbines. So it took them a while to get the second unit online. It was a 2-unit system that they purchased. And now that that is online, they no longer have to buy power off the open market. And so that's where that $3 of savings is coming from. So it's not even like they offered a straight up, here's a $3 credit on your bill. It's because they no longer have to buy power on the open market. And so we're getting power a little bit cheaper because they're generating it.
That's not. I don't even know. I don't even know what to say. That's just wild. So it's one of those things where they're just not really giving us anything.
No, these rates are not being reduced. I think that is the main headline. They were approved by the IURC through a settlement between just CenterPoint and the industrial customers. So all of the normal folks that would normally what's called intervening in this quasi-legal process, this is the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor,
Right.
this is Citizens Action Coalition, sometimes Sierra Club intervenes, the City Council intervened officially this time. They hired a lawyer to be a party to this system. None of those were a quote unquote party to this settlement. So instead of actually going to it's a quasi legal proceeding, like I said, it's like going to court. They settled quote unquote out of court with only the industrial customers, and the IURC approved that. So none of the normal folks represent the consumers were a party to that settlement. And so, I mean, basically, we got kind of screwed because whenever you kind of divvy up rates, you're deciding, okay, where do the percentages lie? You know, you've got your industrial customers, you got your small business customers, you have residential customers. What percentages, who's going to share that load? And when none of the consumer groups were a party, we're getting the brunt of that increase. And that's exactly what happened. So like I said, these rates are not being reduced in any shape or form. They've mentioned that $3. We've kind of already talked about that. The second half of that is said that we're going to save $18 because of avoided costs. And in practical terms, that means they're not going to invest in any new infrastructure for the next few years. They're kind of taking this wait and see approach to see what happens in the market around renewables, with gas infrastructure, because it's gone up quite a bit and it's difficult to obtain gas turbines because of really data center demand and drive. I think it's somewhere on the order of, if you wanted to build a new gas plant now, it's on a 5-year backlog. So I mean, it's kind of already baked in that they can't actually do the conversion that they wanted to over in Warrick County at the Cully plant because they can't get the equipment. And so to say that we're saving $18 because they're not buying something, again, it's not an actual relief.
And I find that an interesting model to begin with for this customer base, to pay them back for everything that they spend money on. Is that normal? Is that something that's just in Indiana?
It's not. This is generally how most investor-owned utilities function in the country. And it's, everybody says, but monopolies are illegal. Sure, but this is kind of granted as a part of a natural monopoly system. And what that means is, in place of competition, we have the IURC. They are supposed to fill that role of providing just and reasonable rates, which is in their mandate, to make sure that they're not receiving excess profits. And I think we can pretty much all agree that system is pretty much broken at this point.
Yeah.
When the legislature passes laws that favor the utility over and over and over again, when the IURC basically never says no to a rate increase, that's not a good system. And we pay for it. Like literally,
Yeah.
we pay for it, and we don't have any say with what actually happens. I think the most egregious part is, people think that the utility companies make money off selling energy, and that's not really the case. They make most of their profit with that guaranteed return on equity for anything that they build. So anything that they build and they put it in their what's called the rate base, they receive about a 10% return on that. And what I've come to discover is that 10% is usually for an industry that has very high risk. So, it's a risky industry, then you get rewarded with a high rate of return if everything works out. Well, the utility industry is the most risk adverse industry of all. They get everything approved to the state.
Yeah.
I mean, every single dollar mostly is in some form approved. So it's not risky. They should not be getting that high of a rate of return. I mean, I think it should be somewhere around 5.5% is what I've seen in a little bit of research. Like that would be the normal cost of capital for them. And that would save us tons of money.
Yeah.
Because what they've not mentioned in any of these press releases is their profits and their CEO compensation and their private jets. And that's never brought into this conversation around affordability.
Now, I'm assuming that you can only guess, but why has the IURC been so lenient to shift the protection from the customer to the monopoly?
The term that I've heard as I've been in these spaces is full regulatory capture. And what that means is the utility companies have enough influence over the legislature that they can basically write the laws how they want to see them applied. And unfortunately, while the IURC does have quite a bit of discretion, they are still beholden to state law. And so when a new, let's take the TDSIC, the Transmission Distribution System Storage Improvement Charge. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
TDSIC. That's one of the 12 hidden ones that you don't see. And just FYI, CenterPoint got approval for $446 million. The first round of those, it lasted 7 years, and they got $454 million approved for 2025 through 2028. So, $900 million for improving the system that they're already responsible for improving. We'll dig into some of those numbers here in a minute to see if we got what we paid for. But so that was a new state law passed that kind of the IURC has no, like, the provision is called a shall provision. They shall do this thing. Not they may do, they shall. And so they're kind of forced in saying, okay, well, we no longer have the authority to pre-approve 80% of these system improvement projects. But they can come back during the rate case, and the last 20% is under their scrutiny. Well, great, 20%. There's still 80% of that 900 million out there that has no oversight. And that's why that law has been called the blank check law by folks like CAC. Because basically, these improvements are being made without any prior oversight. So we can't say if they're wasting our money. And I think I've heard Kerwin at CAC call it the gold-plated infrastructure, because there's incentive to always buy the best thing because you'll get return on whatever that thing is. So there's no of this, like, to our Midwest core frugality built into this system. Right. It is all, let's buy the best thing because we're going to make more money when we do that. And we end up paying for the thing and the profit.
And you think that they just, because they're spending this money here, that influence over IURC, they just say, okay, and we'll pave the way for you to do this?
I've been told, and I'm fairly certain this is true, that the utility industry is second only to the healthcare industry in campaign contributions and other perks of being a state legislator. So that it buys access. The everyday folks, especially down here in Evansville, don't have a lot of access to the state house. And when you have lobbyists spending that kind of money to take folks out to steak dinners and box office tickets and campaign contributions, it ultimately does buy some degree of influence.
So the $5 million for the weatherization, I think it was it's like 33 cents per customer if you do the math. I might have done the math wrong or might not have the right numbers, but I mean, Is that going to help?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that $5 million investment is a good sign, because any time that you can save a kilowatt hour, you are not paying that money to CenterPoint. So any weatherization you can do, and it sounds like it's going to also include some multifamily homes, which is great to see, because they often really miss out on any of the incentive programs. If their landlord doesn't want to participate, they don't really have any recourse in that. Our rental system in Indiana is not great. Renters do not have a lot of power in the system. There's a lot of improvement that could be done there. Unfortunately, I would also like to see the current amount of arrears in debt forgiven. And I don't have the current numbers because they only report this every 6 months. But in March, people that were 60 days behind, and this is March before all of the summer bills hit, they owed $3 million.
Customers, residential customers.
Residential customers that are 60 days behind in March owed $3 million.
$3 million.
And I expect they probably tacked on an extra million to that. And we'll hopefully get the numbers here in a few weeks for the last 2 quarters to see where we are. And that's why they're sending out over 200,000 disconnect notices. People cannot pay these bills.
So how will that forgiveness program will it work? Is that something that you think is actually going to happen?
No. That's a simple answer. I don't think it, not without any kind of state legislation to force the issue. We've tried to get, as consumer advocates, summer disconnect protection laws put into place. They do exist for the 3 coldest months in the winter if you qualify for LIHEAP assistance. But there's a whole lot of folks that don't qualify for that still can't pay their bill and are at risk of being disconnected in the cold of winter. We at minimum need that same level of protection during the summer, because our summers are getting hotter. It is dangerous. All of the things apply in winter if you have medical equipment or are trying to keep insulin refrigerated. I mean, these are life-saving issues if your power gets disconnected. Not to mention that your kids could get taken away if you don't have utility service to your house.
That's something that we haven't even talked about at all. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, this is just life destroying.
Yes. Every time I see that 200,000 number of disconnect notices, I try to think, like, that is an impact on your psychology. Like, that is like, that's a warning that goes to your core. Like, what am I supposed to do? I just 200,000 of those are sent out a year.
How is our community managing that? So if the IURC is not protecting us and our local monopoly is not giving us any forgiveness, how is our community dealing with? Because thankfully, right now, I don't see 200,000 people displaced. But I mean, apparently, we're not too far from that, especially with our current economical climate, our current economy, our climate. Right, it's getting worse. People are making less money compared to inflation. Our money's not going as far as it used to. SNAP is getting shut off. What is our community? How are we reacting to keep this from happening? Because apparently something's happening.
Those 200,000 disconnect notices is when the game starts being played. What bill can I pay this month and ignore next month and make it happen? What friends can I lean on to get reconnected, or pay whatever the minimum fee is to get by the next month? I've seen a lot of mutual aid kick into gear here lately. That's great to see, but I think we're pretty much tapped out. Because I've talked to several of the charities, local charities, and this goes into all the ones that deal with some kind of utility assistance seem to be completely out of money. I mean, it boggles my mind that we're pouring all this charity into our community and it's being funneled essentially straight down to Texas. So a CEO can make $13 million a year.
So the goodwill of our neighbor, the philanthropy, the I can't afford my bill, and my mom's going to help out. I can't afford my bill, my friends are going to help out. My coworkers are going to help out, which happened to me. And I've since then, the amount of stories that have been shared with me where people are doing exactly the same thing, and I'm watching them barely get their power turned back on. I just shared a story in the last episode where it was the same. It was the same situation. So the goodwill of our community is keeping everyone's power on right now.
It's more than that. It's also people are going without. So I've seen so many stories in the Days Facebook group, and we've got 17,000 folks in there, so you see a lot of what their thermostat is set to, what rooms in their house are they closing off, how much are they just suffering just to get by so they don't get disconnected. They're trying to save every little thing that they can. And we're in the situation in Evansville where a significant portion of our housing just has poor insulation and is not very weather tight. And so it's very easy to get to those 2,000 kilowatt hour bills that now equals $500. That's a $500 bill if you're using 2,000 kilowatt hours in a month right now. That's so far above than what it used to be.
Yeah,
it's so far above. So there's just all of those stories out there, and all of these hacks and tricks, and what can I do, and what kind of cooler can I rig up, and it really boggles my mind that we've gotten to this point where electricity is like a luxury. That's not the way it used to be.
no.
And I just don't know how we pull back from that right now without some significant legislation being passed at the state level.
So one of the things we haven't hit on yet is the sale of the Ohio natural gas business. They are now pulling in $2.6 billion of like cash on hand, right?
That's what it sounds like to me.
So what do you think? What do you think the strategy is there, and how does that connect to everything else?
I don't know. It's kind of odd to see because CenterPoint was in this phase of buying utilities in this rapid growth phase the last few years. I mean, that's how we got acquired. New Vector got acquired by CenterPoint. They're on this expansion. They expanded into this is a Texas company, based in Houston. So they expanded into Ohio. They're up in Minnesota. They're I think a couple of other states as well. And so I don't know. I don't know if it was. I mean, I assume it's primarily a business decision. They got whatever they could out of it, and now they're going to sell it off and reinvest. I think is the term that they used, reinvested into this effort they're doing down in Houston. So it just, again, that's one of those numbers that kind of boggles your mind that this small little gas utility is worth $2.8 billion with a B.
Yeah.
And then we're sitting here trying to scrimp and save just to pay an absolutely ridiculous electric bill.
It doesn't make you feel real good.
It does not.
And the next thing they talked about was town halls. So they say they'll be hosting community meetings and they'll be listening to customers. And I think that we've kind of gone through this before. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, we've had some versions of this in the past that DACE helped get put in place with the prior mayor, and they were called these utility assistance fairs. So it included the charity agencies, it included CenterPoint, it included the Evansville Water Utility, because they implemented a plan with a little bit of relief, because I know those rates are also going up to pay for old and outdated infrastructure. And so that's the kind of thing that I want to see, and I'm just not really sure what these are going to be. I'm just kind of reading through the press release. They do have some consumer assistance programs. I don't know what all it takes to qualify for those. It sounds like they're going to be promoting their weatherization programs that they talked about, that $5 million investment. That's all good to see. I definitely want to see that. I don't want it to be more of a spin, because one of the things that I know I think he's now the president over all of Indiana Utilities, Mike Rader, said that they've not explained the increase very well. And when I hear that, I get a little bit angry, because they don't need to explain it to us. I mean, it's absurd,
Yeah.
and there's no way to explain it away. You can't explain away shutting off thousands of folks every year and sending out $200,000 disconnect notices. There's no explaining that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm afraid of, that these might evolve into. But if you have a chance to go to them and get any kind of bill assistance, weatherization assistance, absolutely take advantage.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you've already paid for that. Most of that is baked in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The $5 million, I believe, is coming from their foundation, which is like a separate entity that doesn't really come out of our rates. So we want to see more of that. It needs to come out of the foundation and not out of our rates. But yeah, take advantage of anything you possibly can.
From my point of view, I and I've said this several times already, but I feel like they're shooting themselves in the foot. So a community they destroy is not a community that is sustainable. I mean, if their whole plan is to destroy us and then move on, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, that's not very nice, but but if they want a sustainable model, it would make sense for them to operate in a way that does not cause people not to want to move to Evansville, people to want to leave Evansville, or to where the people that live here can no longer afford to live and thrive. So I'm not really sure what the logic behind not putting back more effort and money into helping the customer base. So I'm a huge advocate of sharing stories. I want these stories heard. I want everybody to tell their stories. I think that does make a difference. But are we telling our stories to the right people? Is a town hall for our local monopoly where we need to go, or do we need to start having town halls with our IURC? I mean, who are the people that we should be talking to that will actually listen and have some sort that'll initiate some sort of change?
Yeah, DACE held some town halls in our early days, and it was with our local and state politicians. I mean, in my mind, ultimately, this is a state government issue. This is a state regulated monopoly. And so they pretty much say what goes down. I think the other half of that is, and I think this is from pressure not only from CenterPoint folks. I know NIPSCO also had a 26% increase, and AES has gone through 2 rate increases. Is there are now an unprecedented number of open seats on the IURC. It's a 5-person body. 3 of those are vacant, and we're all interviewed for this week. So I think enough pressure and complaint and anger directed to those that are ultimately making the decisions is making a difference. I know even the governor has mentioned more than once that affordability needs to be top of mind as they choose who's going to sit on that panel. I think I may have said this earlier. The state government, and especially the chairs of the utilities committees that most of these laws come from, that those 13 hidden bill items come from that committee. They think that they've solved it, and and I want to say, and even one of them in the House said that the same people keep crying about these high bills, and our complaints are hyperbole.
Yeah, but that's what I was getting ready to say.
Which I believe may have been the instigator for the name of this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I watched that live. It was the summer study committee up at the State House, and our local Alex Burton representative sat on that committee. So I was interested to see what he said and what the chair said. And my jaw hit the ground. I couldn't believe he was saying that out loud, and seemed annoyed and angered about the complaints.
That is so wild and out of touch with reality. And I recall that, and you're right, that is one of the things that sparked the creation of this. and I can't imagine how someone doesn't understand that a $500, $550, $600 electric bill is not excessive.
He thinks, and they think, that they've solved this issue because they put into law what they call the 5 pillars. And so any really utility law or any decision by the IURC or any filing that the utility companies do have to answer to those 5 pillars. And one of those pillars is affordability. Unfortunately, there's no real definition in the law what that means. And what ends up happening is the utility company justifies affordability in the words that they want to use. They get to define what that means. And to me, that's not how this is supposed to be working. Affordability should be that you do not fear whatever day of the month that your CenterPoint bill usually shows up, you're not worried about it. You're not fretting over it. They're not sending out 200,000 disconnect notices every year. They're not disconnecting folks. That's affordability. And so far, and this has been in place for a few years at this point, it's done nothing for the affordability crisis. It's only gotten worse in the last 2 years. When you see the chart that's sitting on the table here, and you see that both us and NIPSCO have had the hockey stick chart, that's a warning sign. That is danger.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even to play into account what we keep hearing that's about to happen is this rush to build even more stuff that we're going to pay for to support data centers and hyperscale AI stuff.
I know we have New Carlisle or New Carlisle, Indiana, or the Amazon. Yeah. Do you know of any that are being built closer?
So I have participated in one of the only opportunities to actually go inside the CenterPoint building, the last 2 versions. It's called the Integrated Resource Plan. And this process was put into place when some really bad decisions were made. I believe it was in Duke territory over their coal gasification plant that ultimately never actually performed anywhere near what it was supposed to and cost, billions of dollars that the customers are still paying for. All this process of how they decide of what kind of new generation to build, what kind of new power plants to build was in the dark. The public had no input to that. So that fiasco created this system where every 3 years they have a process where you go to 4 meetings throughout the year. They're day-long meetings. The slide decks are hundreds of slides, but it is a chance where you can provide input in what they're thinking about what kind of new generation they're going to build. And they do run it through models, and they try to ensure that it's affordable and it's meeting all the criteria of the 5 pillars. They have to then file that with IURC, and people can make public comments against that, and then the IURC has to approve it. So usually whatever's in that plan is what will ultimately be built sometime in the future. This is supposed to be like a 20-year look ahead. They look out the next 20 years, but it's like I said, every 3 years they have to go through this process. So in that, don't remember where I was going with this, but
data centers.
We were talking about data centers. They had some modeling that included data centers and what would happen if that would take place. And I think one of my comments during the session was, nothing scared me more than that graph. And one of the people at CenterPoint said, why is that, Christopher? I said, because we're going to have to pay for that.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's not our intent. That's not our intent. I'm like, well, just thinking to myself, like, but that's not what the law is.
Right.
We need some significantly more robust consumer protections if these things are coming. And I suggested to them, and I hope they follow through with it, is we need some kind of community meeting, some kind of working group where folks can contribute. If those are coming and they're bringing all this money, we need like legally binding community benefits agreements.
I really don't understand what's happening in our society right now. I follow AI and humanoid robotics and automation, and I do a lot of research on it. And I'm noticing in a trend that probably 2 to 4%, 4% probably a little high, of recent layoffs are due to AI, advanced manufacturing, automation, and the foreseeable future of what is coming. And if we're going to have a whole bunch of data centers in Indiana, and we have some of the highest rates for power in Indiana, and we have increased layoffs due to AI and automation, the outcome is not positive. If you could just, I don't think I even have to finish the thought.
That's a spiral.
This is heading in a bad direction.
Yes.
And I think that I can see it. I research it every day, but if I can see it, I know that everyone else can see it too, that are planning these things. Actually, I know they can see it because it's in their notes and their plans that, this is possible that we're going to really screw these things up in layman's terms. So I really don't know.
Yeah, if I could add something to that, it seems to me to be very, very short-term thinking.
Yeah.
I think is the problem, because even local governments look at it as a pretty significant boost to property taxes, because these things can bring significant revenue to the city. And in a time where state government has really kind of handicapped how local municipalities generate their income, and now school funding is under threat, and police and fire and all of that is now under threat. This is like a little lifeline. So I don't know if that was the purpose of Senate Bill 1, to put cities in a financial crisis and then dangle these data centers and also small modular reactors, which is something we haven't really talked about. Another very expensive generation technology, like, as the way out.
Yeah.
That's so short term. It's so short term, and you're putting more burden on your constituents that are like essentially subsidizing the generation capacity. The new power plants, which some of the data says we're going to need like 3 times what we currently have,
right,
which is mind-boggling when these things are well over $1 billion each.
Yeah.
The power plants are like, how do we take on any more?
Right. They want us to pay for all that. And then by the time it's all done, we don't have jobs anymore to buy whatever it is they're going to make with all this stuff. I don't see the logic. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. The short-term gains can only make sense to people if they're planning on surviving the apocalypse they create.
There are some bunkers being built out here. Folks that bunkers seem to be on the uptick.
That's probably why. I think they do see this inevitability if we do not change course. So as we start to kind of wrap this up, what do you want listeners to understand most about this moment, about these announcements, what they really mean, and where we're going from here?
It's good to see that there is some response. Now, I think we've kind of disproven most of the assertions in the response, but the $5 million investment, I'm happy to see that. I think weatherization is very important. I'm like a solar proponent, because I think when you own your own generation, that is, you take the power back literally from the utility company that has a lot of power and also power. I would love to see more folks be able to take advantage of that. That has been handicapped in Indiana, unfortunately, from laws passed by the utility company. So weatherization is the next best thing. Any kilowatt hour you can save, any therm you can save, you're not paying that to CenterPoint. And this is like a lasting improvement to your home.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll also feel more comfortable in there, when you do some significant weather improvements. But as I mentioned, people owe at least $3 million right now. So there has to be more. There has to be some ideas put in place that I know Michigan has talked about it, and I believe CAC also has something similar that's a ratepayer bill of rights. I want to see that passed. So a few of those things on there are the right to fair compensation for outages. think that makes sense.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few of those here. Ice storms coming through, tornadoes, extreme weather seems to be the norm every year. Like even this year, we had the ice storm, we had tornado outbreak, we had extreme heat through the summer, we had drought, all in one year.
Yeah.
So these things are happening more and more. So compensating folks when they lose their freezer full of food, I think is fair. The right to fair rates and real accountability, actually putting that in writing as a right, I think is important. These are all things that have to happen at the state level. This third one, it speaks to me at a deep level, the right to end outrageous CEO bonuses.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Yeah, CenterPoint always makes it. They highlight this fact in their earnings report that they never miss a dividend payment.
Oh, wow.
Since they've been around. And so, and a lot of utility CEO compensation is tied to stock price because, they give them stock bonuses. So they're trying to drive that stock price up.
Right.
So really capping that, kind of take away some of that incentive from trying to build more and more stuff and get higher and higher rates, I think is important. So that also goes into, their private jets and other things that they kind of flaunt, and I think locally, I'm always still surprised, and this does go back to Vectren, but they built a skyscraper in between a casino and a bank. To me, if you're going to masquerade as a public utility, it's a little bit of a flaunting of your wealth that you had that kind of extra capital to build that type of building. And I drive by their parking lot. It's not very full most days. I don't see a lot of folks in that parking lot. It just kind of shows me that the priority is not on the customer.
Yeah.
It's on the company. I would like to see, and I believe it's a human right, that you have consistent electric power, that you cannot be shut off for non-payment. We've talked about all of the downstream effects that has when you're disconnected, the worry and fear you have of being disconnected. We need to take that out of the equation. I mean, we're the richest country on earth.
Right.
There shouldn't be any reason to disconnect somebody just because they had a bad week.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. I don't know how we accomplish this, but getting the electric utilities and the utility companies in general out of politics, that seems to be the biggest source of problem that we have.
Yeah.
How do you extract them out of that system when we have Citizens United on the books, where money equals voice? I don't know how we do that, but it's got to happen. And I think, to me, having the right of energy independence is pretty key. And so that includes fair compensation if you invest in solar on your roof. That includes not blocking legislation where we could set up community energy, community solar programs that anybody could subscribe to and get some kind of relief on their bill, actual relief.
Yeah.
Real relief, like written into the law that there is guaranteed bill savings. And that's happened for the last 3 years. There's been a bill at the State House to implement that, to bring in independent companies or a nonprofit group or a local municipality to build a small solar array that anybody can subscribe to. That's been blocked. It's not even gotten a committee hearing. So like all of those things together are where I would like to see us go.
It's interesting that they're making the decisions on who can and can't make money, what kind of businesses can and can't exist in a region. That's kind of insane. They said, no, we don't think that kind of business and opportunity for our citizens should exist, so we're not even going to listen to it. That's wild. So let's talk about what gives you hope. Do you think telling these stories, these conversations that we're having, raising this awareness, can we actually make some change?
I think it's already happening. Seeing this flurry of press releases, obviously they were worried. I think that $3 announcement that kicked all of this off was pretty silly, and folks saw right through it, and they scrambled and released even more press releases. people are aware in this area. I really think that's one of the main accomplishments of DACE is people understand. They know what the IURC is.
Mhm.
I didn't know what that was before I
Right.
got into this. Did you know what that was?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like this concept, this regulatory system that is not really meant for the public to participate in, but yet affects our everyday lives. We've kind of broken that open a little bit. That gives me hope that folks do understand it, and those conversations are happening.
Right.
And businesses felt empowered to speak up. That gives me hope.
Good. No, you're right. And maybe a year and a half ago, if we said IURC, most people would have known what you're talking about, and now they do.
They do.
And I thank you for all of your efforts and what you're doing, and I appreciate it. I think knowledge is power, and when you give it away freely, that takes a lot out of you to do that. And I understand that, and I really want to say thank you for doing that.
I really appreciate that. That's been my mission these many years. Is I'm trying to get the education out, because if you don't understand what's happening, it's really hard to fight against it.
Yep.
So once you dive in, you're like, oh, I get it. I understand. I know who to complain to.
Yeah.
And then you make that complaint to the right person, and it's starting to happen. Even seeing it from the governor, as I mentioned, he hired a new energy czar, essentially, that has asked those questions. I've watched some of the interviews for the candidates for the IURC. The affordability question comes up 2 or 3 times for each interviewee. So that gives me some hope that it's actually being paid attention to. It just needs to get to those utility chairs at the State House.
Yeah.
That's who needs to understand that this is not normal. It's not normal at all. This is not hyperbole.
Well, I really appreciate you being on Gaslit, and I think that's what we can pull from yet another episode, is to do not be silent, share your stories, and be there for one another, because we're all in this together.
All right, thank you for having me, Tommy.
Yeah. Here's the takeaway. Announcements don't equal relief. Bills are driven by approved base rates plus multiple riders. Disconnections and arrears, they're rising. And affordability only matters if customers can keep the power on. Share your story. Show up at any public meeting and direct your comments to state decision makers, especially the IURC and the utility committees at the State House. If you qualify for any weatherization or bill or any kind of assistance program, use them. Every saved kilowatt hour matters. If you have resources, food, funds, logistics, partner with local groups already doing the work. And if you have influence, use it. And if you're listening and you're struggling, you are not alone. Thanks to Chris Norick for the straight facts. Keep sharing your stories. Keep the conversations moving. Listening, sharing, voting, and organizing. This is social action. This is Gaslit, the power of story.